A split-screen moment today. On the one side, an event at the White House showing us what is an American president expressing his support and America's support for Ukraine, an emerging democracy handling a serious foreign policy situation like any leader of the free world should and always has. On the other, a stunning and blockbuster piece of reporting that gives us really disturbing glimpse into what was and what could be again, depending on the outcome of the 2024 election. Brand new reporting today in The Atlantic by Jeffrey Goldberg pulls back the curtain on Chairman Mark Milley's tireless efforts to counter an unstable president, Donald Trump, who was intent on swinging a wrecking ball into the pillars of our democracy. We'll get to that meeting between President Joe Biden and President Zelensky at the White House in a minute, but we begin with that brand new reporting on Milley's efforts to what can only be described as protecting the U.S. military and the country from Donald Trump. The Atlantic reports that Trump's disregard for the rules of the military were clear from the very start of Milley's term as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. From that piece, quote, at his welcome ceremony at Joint Base Myer-Henderson Hall across the Potomac River from the Capitol, Milley gained an early and disturbing insight into Trump's attitude towards soldiers. Milley had chosen a severely wounded Army captain, Luis Avila, to sing God Bless America. Avila, who had completed 5 combat tours, had lost a leg in an IED attack in Afghanistan, and had suffered 2 heart attacks, 2 strokes, and brain damage as a result of his injuries. To Milley and to 4-star generals across the Army, Avila and his wife Claudia represented the heroism, the sacrifice, and the dignity of wounded soldiers. After Avila's performance, Trump walked over to congratulate him, but then said to Milley, within earshot of several witnesses, quote, why do you bring people like that here? Nobody wants to see that, the wounded. Never let Avila appear in public again, Trump told Milley. And that was day 1 on the job for Milley. The rest of his tenure under Donald Trump entailed trying to curb the worst instincts and excesses of Trump and his allies. As The Atlantic reports, 20 men have served as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs since the position was created after World War II. Until Milley, none have been forced to confront the possibility that a president would try to foment or provoke a coup in order to illegally remain in office. A plain reading of the record shows that in the chaotic period before and after the 2020 election, Milley did as much as or more than any other American to defend the constitutional order, to prevent the military from being deployed against the American people, and to forestall the eruption of wars within America's nuclear-armed adversaries. His defense of the constitutional order, as The Atlantic puts it, entailed being on high alert for any moves made by Trump and his coup-plotting allies. From that new reporting, quote, shortly after Defense Secretary Mark Esper was fired, Milley told both Kash Patel and Ezra Cohen-Watnick, another Trump loyalist sent to the Pentagon, that he would make sure they would see the world from behind bars if they did anything illegal to prevent Joe Biden from taking the oath of office on January 20th. Both men have denied being warned in this manner. When the plot to overturn the 2020 election erupted into violence on January 6, Milley played a critical role in the response. In his testimony to the January 6 Select Committee, Milley underscored Trump's dereliction of duty. Watch.
Yeah, you're the commander-in-chief. You got an assault going on the Capitol of the United States of America. And there's nothing. No call, nothing, zero.
Zero. And in the tense period after the insurrection, as concerns about the country's stability spiked here at home and abroad, Milley, according to this new reporting in The Atlantic, quote, gathered the Pentagon's top nuclear officers for an emergency meeting. According to meeting participants, Milley said, quote, if anything weird or crazy happens, just make sure we all know. Milley then went to each officer in turn and asked if he understood the procedures. They all affirmed that they did. Milley told other members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, quote, all we've got to do is see to it that the plane lands on January 20th, when the constitutional transfer of power to the new president would be completed. extraordinary new reporting on the unprecedented efforts of the nation's top military officer to protect the stability of our democracy in the face of a threat posed by its own president is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Retired four-star general and MSNBC military analyst Barry McCaffrey is here. Editor-at-large for The Bulwark and MSNBC contributor Charlie Sykes is here. And the former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, Tim Heaphy's here. General McCaffrey, there had been some reporting, I think, over the years about Trump's disregard for men and women who had served. I mean, I think he rose to prominence in the Republican Party after he said about John McCain, "I like soldiers who weren't captured." He would go on to disparage George H.W. Bush and others. But to hear that he told the military, the incoming chairman of the Joint Chiefs, to, quote, never have the wounded here again, feels like a physical assault against the best of our country, the people who love it so much that they fight to protect it. How do you feel?
Well, you know, I think it's really heartbreaking. It's a tragic situation to read this kind of well-resourced, incredible accounting on what was going on, much of which, by the way, I was aware of at the time. We had 60,000 killed and wounded protecting the American people following 9/11. Wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, special operations missions around the world. It was a giant loss. The armed forces were totally committed, to include the National Guard and reserves. And so to have a president with this, first of all, an ignorant man of the first order, a lawless man who was unaware of the Constitution, thought he could do anything he basically wanted to. And at the time, I was reporting on this network. So when they put an acting Secretary of Defense, a retired lieutenant colonel, and a gang of his coterie into the Department of Defense, I said, this guy is setting up a coup against the United States. That's what you'd have to conclude if it was a third world country. So we were vulnerable to having a president in office with immense authority who was truly lacked any character.